Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin with Jurassic Magic, and in today's video I'm going to be upgrading the new Revival Trance from the Final Fantasy set. And I gotta say, overall on this deck, it looks very fun right out of the box. And I do think that's how most people are going to be playing it, because they want to keep all Final Fantasy cards only in that deck specifically, which of course there is some value to that, but if you're looking to upgrade it even further, this video is for you. And if you're not familiar with my upgrades on these pre-constructed decks that Wizards of the Coast produces, I'll give you a little bit of a rundown. So first and foremost, I talk about the new cards of the deck along with the reprints. I usually like to talk about this first, talking about the synergy behind the cards and how you want to play around it. And then following that, I will then discuss 10 cards that you should put in and then 10 cards that you should take out all at the same time. I'll compare and contrast each card and why you may want to replace it with one other card. And so now with that said, let's get it started. Let's jump right into it. So normally in pre-constructed decks, you usually have two commanders that you could choose from, the front-facing commander and the backup commander. Let's read what they do and see which one you may want to consider building around with when upgrading this deck. First up, Terra, Herald of Hope. For 1 red, white, and a black, it's a legendary creature, human, wizard, warrior, and it has the ability Trance. At the beginning of combat on your turn, mill 2 cards. Terra gains flying until end of turn. She also has the added bonus, whenever she deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2 mana. When you do, return target creature card with power 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So that's pretty good. This is an engine for us to put cards into our graveyard so that we can reanimate them later. Not only that, she does grant herself flying. She has that built-in evasion, so that way when you swing in and connect, you could pay 2 and return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is a self-engine, which I feel like is the better option compared to the other. But make no mistake, I do believe Celeste Rune Knight is also pretty good too. For 1 red, white, and a black, it's a legendary creature, human, wizard, knight, and it has the ability when it enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards plus 1. Whenever one or more creatures you control enter, if one or more of them entered from a graveyard or were cast from a graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And so that could be still pretty powerful. It can be a win con in the command zone, because the more and more creature cards you reanimate from your graveyard to the battlefield, the more you can put 1/1 counters on each creature you control. So in a weird way, you want to go wide with a lot of creatures, reanimating them, and consistently put a lot of 1/1 counters on them. Besides that point, I do believe Terra is the better choice as a commander. It is 1 less mana. She can consistently put cards into your graveyard and reanimate them later by dealing combat damage. That is pretty good in its own right, and I believe out of the two options, this one is the way to go. But don't let my opinion dissuade you. I do believe some of the cards that I talk about today with upgrading can be applicable for Celeste too. So those are the two commanders of the deck. Of course, there's a lot of new cards. I was kind of overwhelmed with all these precons, seeing how many new cards are in this set specifically. So instead of talking about all the new cards, I'm going to discuss 10 of my favorites that are new and exciting. So let's first start off small by talking about the Warring Triad. I like this because this acts as a mana dork in a weird way. For 3 mana, it has flying, trample, and haste, and it's also a god. As long as there are fewer than 8 cards in your graveyard, the Warring Triad isn't a creature. You could also tap it, mill a card. Target player adds 1 mana of any color, so you don't even have to target yourself. You could target somebody else if you want to play that political game, but most likely you want to target yourself so that you could get that mana. I do like how it also has haste, so that if it is a creature on the battlefield, you can just tap it right away. And it also has a 5/5 body, so that for 3 mana is still pretty good. I like it because it's a mill engine. You can tap for mana, and you can have it be a creature on the battlefield. But now let's move on and talk about Umaru Raging Yeti. I love cryptids, and so Yetis are one of them. And this one is quite powerful. For 5 and a red, it's a legendary creature, Yeti Berserker with trample. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose 1 at random. So you have 3 options to choose from, obviously at random. Other creatures you control get +3/+0 and gain trample until end of turn. You discard your hand, then draw 4 cards. Or Umaru deals 5 damage to any target, so they're all upside. I like how this could either act as an overrun ability, drawing cards for yourself, and removal. Of course, the one big downside is the fact that you're probably not going to choose the one you want at a specific moment. If you have a board full of creatures, you're most likely going to want to have that first option, but you might have one of those other 2 options rolled instead for yourself. So it is really just the luck of the die with the Yeti, but I think that makes it a lot more fun. Another card, or should I say cards, is Shadow Mysterious Assassin with Interceptor Shadow's Hound. I wish these two had partner with each other. I think that would have been perfectly acceptable. And honestly, if you're playing a Rule 0 game, I would allow those two being partners, because that is a man's best friend after all. But let's read what these two do. Shadow for 2 and a black, legendary creature, human assassin with death touch, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice another non-land permanent. If you do, draw 2 cards and each opponent loses life equal to the mana value of the sacrificed permanent. So this is pretty good because it is card draw, and opponents will lose life in the process. And it is is interesting. It is any non-land permanent. It's not just a creature. If you want to sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, anything will be good for you. And I also like Interceptor Shadow's Hound. I like how this kind of buffs up Shadow in a way, giving assassins you control menace. And whenever you attack with one or more legendary creatures, you may pay 2 and a black. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. And after reading these two together, is Shadow just constantly sacrificing Interceptor so that way you can just return an Interceptor from the graveyard to the battlefield? I don't know the lore reasons of this, and part of me doesn't want to know if he's just sacrificing his dog over and over again. So either way, these two are pretty good. I like the synergy that they have with each other, only if the commander was an assassin herself, but that's not the case. But let's move on to Kefka Dancing Mad. I already made a video on Kefka, the Grixis version. Definitely go check that out if you haven't recently. But this one is quite powerful too. During your turn, Kefka has Indestructible. At the beginning of your end step, exile a card at random from each opponent's graveyard. You may cast any number of spells among those cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. Then each player who owns the spell you cast this way loses life equal to its mana value. So this is quite interesting. It's theft in a little bit of a different way where you're exiling stuff randomly from your opponent's graveyard. This can be brutal in some situations where if somebody has a crazy effect that you get to play yourself. So this one's fun because I like the chaos that it ensues with, and it does have Indestructible too. It is going to be hard to remove on your turn, but again, this one is high at CMC with 7, so we could take it down a notch and talk about another card that is new, like Bannon, the Returner's Leader. This is only red and a white, so 2 mana total for a human cleric rebel, and it has the Prey ability. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a creature spell from among cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere other than the battlefield this turn. Whenever you attack, you may pay 1 and discard a card. If you do, you draw a card, so this is a great engine itself. You're going to be attacking, paying 1, discarding 1 creature that you could later then cast. All at 2 CMC, this is pretty good. I like how much of an engine this is. Almost in a weird way, kind of reminds me of Terra, but maybe not as good. Another card I am fascinated with is Gogo, Mysterious Mime. It has a cool ability. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may have it become a copy of another target creature you control until on a turn, except its name is Gogo, Mysterious Mime. If you do, Gogo and that creature each get +2/+0 and gain haste until on a turn and attack this turn of Fable. So this is a way to give another creature haste that you just randomly casted. Let's just say like an Atali. You could just basically get 2 Atalis on the battlefield swinging in, giving them +2/+0. Of course, there's a lot of other creatures that you can think about, but the Atali does have a really good attack trigger. I also feel like this is an ability normally blue has, but I'm glad it's in red. Red needs all the help that it could get. So there are a lot of legendary creatures that are in this deck specifically. I also wanted to highlight some non-creature spells. Something like Snort is a really good wheel effect for 3 and a red. Each player may discard their hand and draw 5 cards. Then Snort deals 5 damage to each opponent who discarded their hand this way, and it has a flashback cost of 5 and a red. So this is pretty powerful. I like how it is a May ability. Your opponents have the choice of, do I want to discard my hand, but I will have to take damage. Some people might find that worth it depending on how bad their hand is. But discarding cards and drawing 5 cards is really good, especially if you're low on cards or if you just want to discard them into the graveyard so that you could reanimate them later. Snort is very powerful. I like this effect a lot. Another card I like a lot is Esper's 2 Magicite for 3 and a black. Exile each opponent's graveyard. When you do, choose up to 1 target creature a card exiled this way. Create a token that's a copy of that card except it's an artifact and it loses all other card types. So I like this because not only do not enough people play Graveyard Hate, which more people should in my opinion, it makes a token copy very similar to like a Shelob effect where they lose all other card types and it is an artifact. So if somebody has a really good ability that you want to take, you could easily do that by exiling it with this card and making a token copy of it. So those are some of the new cards that I wanted to highlight. Of course, there are some great reprints. I'm not going to necessarily talk about as far as financial value goes because of course I want to focus more on synergy. So one card I find very good in this deck is Priest of the Fellrights. This is great because you could pay 3, sacrifice, and return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it has an unearth ability where you could restart that essentially. I also like Morbid Opportunist because creatures are going to be dying left and right. Giving you incidental card draw is very good. The same can be applied for Pitiless Plunderer. Creatures are going to be dying, especially your own, so having a way of getting treasure is going to be very valuable. One that I was quite surprised to see in this deck, and actually 2 of them, is Reanimate and Rise of the Dark Realms. Reanimate itself is like a $10 card and Rise of the Dark Realms is like a $15 card. Each of these are very good. Reanimate is a one-off spell, reanimating 1 creature all at the expense of life, where Rise of the Dark Realms could be a win con for your deck, putting all creature cards from all graveyards, that includes your opponent's graveyards, onto the battlefield under your control. Even though it is 9 mana, it is definitely worthy of a great include in this. I'm surprised they actually put Reanimate and Rise of the Dark Realms in the same deck. Another great reanimation spell that is honestly a great reprint, I didn't realize this hasn't been reprinted in a while, is Stitch Together. This could return a target creature card from your graveyard to to your hand, or if you have that threshold ability, you can return it to the battlefield instead. So there are a lot of other good reprints, and also what I do like about this deck and many of the other decks that are in Universes Beyond is they have their own treatment versions of them. They're using a lot of different art that is inspired by Final Fantasy and not Magic the IP related, which is quite cool. I like how I could use some of these cards for my SpongeBob Universes Beyond deck. Besides that point, this is a pretty good deck overall when considering the new cards and the reprints. But if I did have a critique on this deck, it would definitely be the land base. Not by any means are they bad, it's just of course you could improve them by a significant amount, especially knowing the price tag of these decks. But I can't complain about that too much because that's a normal staple of how they operate their precons. However, that does lead me into my next topic, and that's 10 cards in and 10 cards out. So what do we want to replace and also put in? There are a lot of options that you could take advantage of to really heighten this deck. Because the commander itself focuses on reanimating a bunch of little creatures, I would stick with that more. Something like Lotho Corrupt Sheriff is a great option to swap in, mainly because it'll give you treasure. Getting acceleration on mana is critical, especially if you want to play those high CMC spells. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, you lose 1 life and create a treasure token. That is very good in its own right and worthy of an inclusion. So I definitely swap in Lotho for the mana production. I would trade it in for Meteor Golem, and look, I know this card is pretty good with our commander because we could just reanimate it and destroy a non-land permanent, which seems good, but Mardu is really good at removing any permanent. Plus Meteor Golem, if we just have it in our hand, is going to be quite expensive. I don't believe this is going to be good for us in the long term, especially when we have a lot of removal in our arsenal. Another card I'm not a big fan of is Solemn Simulacrum, and I know this can be okay in the deck because it ramps you, and when it dies you get card draw. That could be okay. However, personally I don't find it very good in this type of deck when we could get better cards. If you want to get better value out of a permanent, Taval's Judgment is a perfect card. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, choose one that has been chosen this turn. You draw a card, create a treasure token, or make a 2/2 token. This one is a lot more versatile than a one-time effect like Solemn Simulacrum. Cards are going to be leaving your graveyard left and right. Why not get that added bonus? Also, if you truly want to synergize with your commander, I believe there are some new cards that I feel like personally can be taken out. Something like Setzer, Wandering Gambler, it doesn't necessarily feel like it helps with the reanimation strategy. It feels like in its own right it's a commander that you could build around separately that they just kind of threw in this deck. The same can be applied for Strago and Realm. This is a pretty chaotic card that you're just stealing cards from your opponent's library and casting them. I personally doesn't feel like it has too much synergy with the deck and could potentially get taken out. I would replace these two cards with some cards that get extra combats for itself because Terra, Herald of Hope does have a combat trigger. Why not double them up? You could use a card like Fear of Missing Out and Aurelia the War Leader. And what's very good about these two cards is the fact that each of them have 3 power or less that we can reanimate with our commander. Fear of Missing Out will give us an extra combat when it attacks, and if you have Delirium. And not only that, it is a great looter, discarding a card then drawing a card when it enters. Aurelia the War Leader is also another one that's really good. You just get an extra combat, swinging in the air, and it'll happen each turn. And again, I don't really mean to knock down so much of the legendaries that are in this deck. I just feel personally they don't have any synergy with the game plan. So that will include some more cards. Something like Edgar, Master Machinist, isn't necessarily good for this deck because we are casting an artifact spell from our graveyard. It will enter tapped. However, we want to focus on creatures, returning them from the graveyard to the battlefield with Terra, and we don't have a huge amount of artifacts in this deck that we want to be reanimating. It does buff itself based off of the greatest mana value among artifacts you control, but I don't think it's necessarily good for the game plan. The same can be applied for Night's Whisper, and I know a lot of people love this card. I'm just not a big fan of it. It doesn't have a way of filling our graveyard. You draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. I would replace that and Edgar for 2 other cards. Night's Whisper, you could easily throw in Faithless Looting. This is a much better card as far as drawing 2 cards and discarding 2 cards. You have that flashback ability. And another card that could be quite useful that actually does synergize with our commander is Blade Historian. Attacking creatures you control have double strike. So again, with our commander Terra, Herald of Hope, it has a deals combat trigger. Why not give it double strike and get 2 combat triggers in 1 turn? And plus you can reanimate it because it has power 3 or less. So this one is very powerful and can be a game closer. Also, something I did notice about this deck, it is lacking in removal and really kind of any interaction. So I would boost up the interaction and decrease the creature amount. Something like Anguish Unmaking or even Boros Charm can be very valuable. Anguish Unmaking exiles a target online permanent, you lose 3 life. You might be thinking to yourself, I don't want to lose 3 life, but if somebody has a really big scary threat on the battlefield that is any permanent, it may just be worth it for yourself to remove it. Boros Charm is excellent because it does give a target creature double strike, which we want to do with our commander, but most likely people want to remove our commander, so giving it indestructible can be pretty useful. And if anything else, if somebody just has 4 or less life, just chuck 4 damage at them with Boros Charm. Another interaction piece I've been putting in a lot of my decks is Untimely Malfunction. This is incredible because it destroys target artifact or changes the target of target spell or ability with a single target, and that's the ability I like to use the most. But honestly, that last ability is pretty good with our commander because 1 or 2 target creatures can't block this turn. Let's just say somebody has a dragon on the battlefield but you want to swing at them. Well, hey, that dragon can't block anymore and your commander can swing in, get that trigger going, then reanimating your creature by paying 2 mana. But again, I like this for that second ability. It acts almost as a counter spell, or even better in some situations if somebody tries to destroy your commander, you can just redirect that spell by destroying one of their creatures. Or if somebody tries to counter one of your spells, you could redirect that counter spell to counter Untimely Malfunction, kind of negating that counter spell in total. So there's a lot of uses out of this. Definitely one of my favorite cards in most recent memory. And the last card I wanted to talk about today is Akroma's Will. And look, if you want a good win con, Akroma's Will is definitely one of the best ones you could throw in a Mardu deck especially. Choose one. If you control your commander, you choose both instead. So either creatures you control gain Flying, Vigilance, and Double Strike until end of turn, or creatures you control gain Lifelink, Indestructible, and Protection from all colors until end of turn. And of course, if you have a commander, that means both. Even though this is a little bit more of an expensive card, this has won me so many games, and if you're going with that strategy of putting a lot of creature cards in your battlefield, you could swing in for a huge amount of damage, giving them Protection, Double Strike, and all those other keywords. So of course, there are 4 cards that I talked about that you should put in. Now I should talk about 4 cards that you should take out. I personally don't like Millikin. Even though it is okay, you're milling a card, adding a mana, I don't like how it is a creature. It's very susceptible to removal, even though it is an artifact creature that can be reanimated with your commander. I personally feel like there's some better options. Like I mentioned, I would rather have more removal. The same can be applied for Palace Jailer. If you don't really have any Monarch synergy, I personally wouldn't recommend having it in the deck. Another card I feel like is not necessarily worth it is Ruin Grinder, and it is a pretty cool reprint. However, in this type of deck, we're not really sacrificing any creatures, so that way we could wheel and draw 7 cards. I mean, we can reanimate it from the graveyard to the battlefield, but it does have 7 power. Most likely we're not reanimating it from our commander, and we would have to rely on other reanimation spells. And the last card I would possibly take out is Laughing Mad, and I know it has some pretty sweet Kefka art. However, I personally feel that Faithless Looting is a lot better than this spell. Even though it is at instant speed, you're discarding a card then drawing 2 cards, and it has that flashback ability, I would much rather have Faithless Looting. Plus at 3 mana, there are better rates that you could utilize this with. So that is it. Those are 10 cards that you should put in and 10 cards that you should take out. Let me know down below in the comments what you think of this video and if you found it helpful. And just to give you my overall thoughts about this deck, I think it is pretty good. I like the reprints. The reprints are so good in this deck specifically. I almost forgot to mention Ruinous Ultimatum. That is another great card. It is pretty expensive to cast, but still it is quite powerful being a one-sided board wipe. So the reprints are good. Some of the new cards are good. Of course, some of the new cards don't have too much synergy with your commander. So obviously that's why I had to mention them in the cuts. So again, let me know down below in the comments what do you think of this deck. Do you plan on buying it yourself? Also make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. With that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.